Okay, welcome to this event by the Center for Philosophical Studies of History. My name is Georg Gangli. I am the center's coordinator, and I will also be today's moderator. Yeah. More importantly, today's speaker is Louis-Étienne Villeneuve, sitting to my left, and we will very soon switch chairs. Louis-Étienne will speak today about colligatory concepts and colligations in integrated history and philosophy of science. Now, Louis-Étienne is a lecturer at the University of Quebec in Trois-Rivières in Canada, and currently is also a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Cambridge. There, Louis-Étienne works on the project Mentalization, Colligations, and Justification in the History of Science. And I think of much of this we will hear today, similar topics. Louis-Étienne's main research interests lie in the philosophy of science, the history and historiography of science, and epistemology. And concerning today's topic, Louis-Étienne has also published a paper in 2022, which bears the English title, Two Forms of Conceptual Obsolescence in History, in the journal Philosophia Scientiae. And I'm emphasizing the English title because the paper was published in French, but it has an English title too, and I have the French title here too, but so I guess you would have to speak French to be able to read that paper. Or maybe it would at least be useful.
It would help. Yeah,
it would help.
Of course.
Okay. This is the second event, talk of our autumn seminar. That means in total we will have 5 events. There are 3 remaining. Next, we will have, after today, we will have Matt Wolfslager, who's also here in the room with us today, very graciously, speaking about on the 31st of October on rival interpretative approaches in the historiography of science. This event will also be hybrid, so like here and on Zoom. Then next we'll have Veronica Toxi from the University of Buenos Aires on November 28th, speaking about trust, testimony, and the epistemic value of historical narrative. That talk will be fully online on Zoom. And finally, on December 19th, we'll have Yassin Ramazan from, I think this was Boğaziçi University? Boğaziçi University in Istanbul. On the topic history of nature in medieval Islamic thought, and this talk will in all likelihood also be in hybrid. So
it will be online.
It will be online. Okay,
yes.
We got new information. It will be online. It will only be on Zoom. Okay, more information about all our talks can be found closer to their date on our social media channels and on our homepage. Now, if you want to stay updated about our activities, please consider following our social media channels. We have Facebook, X, formerly Twitter. And very soon we'll also have Blue Sky. We're about to migrate away too from X. If you're interested in becoming a visiting scholar, just as Matt is, he just arrived in the last few days and stayed with us for 2 months now, please consult our homepage. All information about our visiting scholarships are there. And if you would like to speak in our seminar, please also contact us. That's also always possible. Now, finally, only a few technicalities. I will forcibly mute online for the duration of the talk. And I'm only doing this because we have a big speaker in the middle of the room to avoid unnecessary disturbance. But worry not, we'll be liberated in the discussion session again. After Louis-Étienne's talk, there will be a discussion session. In the discussion session, we'll alternate between online and in the room. So if you have a question or comment online, please first indicate so in the chat, and I'll make a speakers list. And when it's your turn, you can either speak up with or without your camera on, or you can write your question in the chat, and I'll read it out loud. And we will prioritize people who haven't spoken yet, so they will move up on the speakers list. That was it for me already. Thanks, Louis-Étienne, for being here and talking to us. I'll just share a presentation. Please come to the seat. And then we're good to go. Okay. Move like this. So. Okay, thanks.
All right, so thank you very much, Georg, for this wonderful presentation. And thank you also for inviting me for this talk today. The topic of the talk would be integrated history and philosophy of science. But I think that we will also address some issues about general philosophy of historiography. So even if you're not interested in this specific form of inquiry, that is integrated history and philosophy of science, I think that there are some critical content my presentation that can be of use for general philosophers of historiography. So the presentation is divided in 3 different parts. First, I will give some background and preliminaries about what is IHPS, Integrated History and Philosophy of Science. After that, I will present some hypotheses on why there are missing connections between IHPST and general philosophy of historiography. And in the last part, I will give some examples of application of a philosophy of historiography terminology to problems that are still discussed by HPSers, so historians and philosophers of science. The main suggestion that with has first, I had the intention to give 2 suggestions, so that's why it's plural, but it was too long for the presentation, so it's only 1 suggestion. Now, it is to move from a philosophy of historical case studies and episodes to a philosophy of colligations and colligatory concepts in IHPS. So I hope that by the end of the presentation, this plan will make sense to all of you. So let's begin with some background and preliminaries. What do we mean? What does it mean to do integrated history and philosophy of science? And I will use IHPS for the rest of the presentation because it is long to say full form every time. So, but I give here a very large and vague definition to avoid disagreements. We can understand integrated history and philosophy of science as a form of inquiry based on the idea that history of science and philosophy of science have a dynamic interplay and therefore should be jointly practiced. A classical exemplar of what could be seen as IHPS kind of work is the Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. Of course, it is anachronistic to say that Kuhn was doing IHPS because it wasn't a label available at his time. And we can even argue that Kuhn did not conceive himself as a historian or as doing the kind of history we find in historical departments. So here we can see the work of Kuhn more as something that launched the IHPS form of inquiry. If we try to identify someone who is explicitly doing IHPS, I think a safe guess would be Hasok Chang. He considers himself as doing IHPS in work like Inventing Temperature or is Water H2O. And he is also doing a lot of reflexive work on what IHPS should be. So the first question that comes to mind when we think about this idea is what we mean by jointly practiced. What is the kind of practices that we should employ in doing IHPS? And to give you some background on this, I will present 3 different ways to understand this idea to jointly practice history and philosophy of science. So a first approach or a family of approach can be found in the work of Larry Loden, It has been discussed by David Yule also, and here I would call this naturalist HPS, not IHPS, because for these philosophers, it is not necessarily an obligation for philosophers of science to practice history of science, but they conceive that history of science and philosophy of science have a dynamic interplay. So what's the idea behind naturalist HPS is the idea that philosophical claims about science should be tested by historical data. That's the kind of terminology that they used first, historical data. So an example of this would be to test claims such as scientific revolutions are always preceded by a crisis. So claims like this should be confirmed or falsified by the data produced by the history of science. Of course, for philosophers of historiography, we can have an immediate reaction to this idea, just the use of word of historical data, what is meant by that. And what's missing from that conception is precisely the recognition that historical data produced by the history of science are not unmediated. They are already framed by historians. So if you want, for instance, to test claims about scientific revolutions, we first need groups of historical events or sets of historical events to be framed as scientific revolutions. So the data required is not unproblematically available. We use Kinzel, Katerina Kinzel's words. So if we want to test claims about scientific revolutions, we need first to frame scientific revolution, but this framing is not unmediated. There's already some historiographical operations and concepts involved in such a framing. In this literature, you will never find any mention of general philosophers of historiography. And that's probably one reason why it took a lot of time before the very idea of historical data was questioned. Another kind of approach, which is closer to the kind of work we do in general philosophy of historiography, to defenders of this approach are Judah Chikore and Hasok Chang. And for the sake of the presentation, I call this approach, family of approaches, hermeneutist IHPS. The idea behind this kind of approach is that philosophical apparatus or philosophical conceptual apparatus should be put in reflexive equilibrium with historical episodes. The meaning of this is, if I give it an example, if the philosophical concept of paradigm stumbles when trying to articulate what was at play during the chemical revolution, then we should enrich our philosophical apparatus with a modified concept or even new concepts, such as system of practice. So that's the idea of reflexive equilibrium. We try to have a philosophical apparatus that fits the episode we're trying to articulate. And if we come across problems in doing that, then we should modify our conceptual apparatus. This is exemplified in the work of Chang when he presents different relations between history and philosophy. So history gives philosophy the subject matter, counterexamples, and new concepts for better understanding of puzzling episodes. On the other side, the philosophy gives history conceptual framework, detection of implausibility, discovery of new historical facts to remove philosophical puzzle. So here you have a sense of what is meant by a dynamic interplay between two fields, two disciplines. However, missing from this conception is the idea that articulating an episode is not just conceptually laden and conceptually driven, it also necessitates other historiographic operations. If I give an example of that, the concept of paradigm stumbled for Chang because the episode of the chemical revolution he's dealing with is, from the outset, reconstructed differently than the one discussed by Kuhn. So there's no such thing like a historical episode that precedes our historiographic operations. And in that sense, concept can stumble in some reconstruction while not stumble in others. Okay. Here we have attempts on attempts to bridge the gap between the kind of thinking on methodological issues in HPS and the kind of work we do in general philosophy of historiography, work done by your very own Jouni-Matti Kuukkanen, and also Katerina Kinzel, both in an article titled Narrative and Evidence, and another chapter on pluralism in historiography, a case study of case studies. This family of approach, we can name it reconstructivist IHPS, so it's not a name they use, it's my own. And I've put re into parentheses because when you read the work done by Kuukkanen, you will see the term constructivist construction used. And when you read the word of Kinzel, you will see reconstructions. And okay, and this tells us something about probably the kind of ontological commitment that we have in both work. So maybe there's one work that is less committed to the existence of something that is reconstructed. In any case, here I will use reconstructivist to reunite these two senses. So what is shared in Kuukkanen and Kinzel's work is that philosophy can utilize historical episodes as long as it acknowledges that these episodes are already framed by historiographical operations. In other words, presentation of the chemical revolution involves choices related to selection, structuration, and treatment that must be taken into account when using it as evidential support. It's not just about modifying our philosophical apparatus. It is not about only testing philosophical thesis with historical data. You must also take into account the historiographical operations that are at play in the presentation of the episode. So I believe this is the way to go. It is for sure the more acute conception when it comes to analyze what is an historical episode. And interestingly, the works of Kuukkanen and Kinzel complement each other by emphasizing different dimensions. So on one hand, Kuukkanen proposes a theory of evaluation that he further developed in post-narrativist philosophy of historiography of reconstructions a topic that is addressed in Kinzel's work, but not in a systematic way. And on the other hand, Kinzel engages more extensively than Kuukkanen in determining what kinds of evidential support reconstruction can and cannot provide for philosophical claims about science. And to be fair, work of Kuukkanen wasn't intended for HPS, but more, it was more a critic of SSK programs, so sociology of knowledge. But the critiques we find in the article are applicable to the HPS project, since in both these fields we have the intuition that we should use history to provide some empirical support to philosophical or claims about science. All right. So, although one may disagree on the specific claims of each proposal, the work of Kuukkanen and Kinzel has, in my view, two merits. First, it offers to this day the best critique of the persistent, naive empirical assumptions found in HPS, this idea that we should test with historical data, or that episodes are something that on which we can confront our philosophical apparatus. And also it brings forward the two questions that an updated philosophy of HPS should address. That are so first, so this is pathway for renewed IHPS. Okay, there's something. Okay, you want it worked on the computer. I think it's okay. Okay, so first programmatic question for a renewed IHPS. What are the criteria for evaluating reconstructions of past episodes in the historiography of science? We can agree or we can disagree on a proposal by Kuukkanen. It is a question that we have to address if we want to use historical episode to bolster claim about science. Second question is, once we accept that episodes and cases are reconstructions, what kind of data or evidential support do they provide for IHPS? So there's kind of consequences in accepting that episodes and cases are reconstructions and that they involve historiographical narration. So I'll come back more on that in a few slides. Unfortunately, not much has been done since in addressing these questions in the HPS literature, even if these articles had some responses, other work. So the field today remains largely committed to the same naturalist and hermeneutist approaches, along with the same naive empirical assumptions, something that I can observe every day in different HPS departments. So why are there missing connections? I think it is a good way to put it, to follow Kinzel. It is ironic, if not upright absurd, that people whose profession it is to reflect on the complex methodologies of the natural science, philosophers of science, should be blind to methodological questions arising in the discipline of history. And we have similar claims in the article wrote by Kuukkanen. Because more than anyone else in academia, even historians, in some sense, HPS scholars should have natural inclination toward the philosophy of history and historiography. Their job is to study how we produce knowledge. And when they try to do it for natural science or for science in general, they are trying to produce knowledge. So there's kind of a reflexive necessity here. So you would expect that HPS scholars would be interested to read philosophy of history and historiography. But if we want to explain the missing connections, I think we can also put some blame on the general philosophy of historiography. It's not just something odd that we find on the side of HPSers. I think there are some reasons why GPH is not able to reach to practitioners of IHPS. So I will give here three reasons. First, the language is unstandardized in general philosophy of historiography. I will give some example next slides. Also, concepts such as narrative are confusing and unappealing to philosophers of science. So I will explain later. And also GPH scholars do not directly engage with HPSers, even though they may have answers to their problems. So that's another thing that explains the missing connections. Maybe some people working on historical evidence, historiographical reasoning can play a role in the methodological questions that HPSers have, but they do not engage for different reasons. So let's look at each point in more detail. First, language is unstandardized. I think it's quite obvious that it has become virtually an obligation for any GPH scholar whenever he or she introduces the concept of narrative to include the kind of preamble reminding readers that there is no consensus on either the meaning or the proper use of the term in general philosophy of historiography. So that's, of course, an issue if you want to reach out to other fields. In the same vein, historical reconstruction has contradictory uses depending on realist, constructivist, or postmodern underpinnings. As historians, do we try to reconstruct historical events as they were, like when we say that we do a facial reconstruction, or do we construct again, or construct in another way something in a different medium to convey information about the intended target, like building a model of the Coliseum. So we reconstruct the Coliseum in a model. So even if some HPSers can be appealed by the philosophy of history or the philosophy of historiography, if they start reading what we have to offer, they will quickly find it confusing to see that expressions such as historical reconstruction and narrative that are central to our discipline are unstandardized. That's one issue. And as in other branches of philosophy, calls for standardization are likely to achieve only local success. So I don't think we have to standardize the entire field of general philosophy of historiography just because we wanted to make it more appealing to HPS scholars. But at least we can develop a basic conceptual framework for a reconstructivist IHPS. Not to, I don't know why it's there. Since it is a new way to approach IHPS, we have kind of conceptual space to propose something that approximates standardization, rather than consistently attempting to summarize and explain the unstandardized language of GPH to HPS scholars in short paragraphs or articles. So if you read, for instance, the work of Kuukkanen and Kinzel, you read the articles and you have like 4 or 5 paragraphs trying to resume some insights we have in general philosophy of historiography, but since the language uses unstandardized, it breaks purpose of being accessible. So if we develop something that is close to standardization, I think we have a better chance of success. So this is a third pathway for renewed IHPS. It's internationalization, developed for IHPS, a conceptual framework close to standardization. So to that end, if we are to develop a standardized language to think about reconstructions in IHPS, a suggestion is to move away from narrative terminology. Why? Because concepts such as narrative are confusing and unappealing to philosophers of science, and it's an everyday experience for me to observe how the concepts stumbles when trying to discuss methodological issues with HPSers. One possible explanation of that is that HPS scholars have a vague understanding of what narrative signifies, generally viewing it more as a communicative dimension than a methodological one. Moreover, narrative is still commonly associated with stories, and HPS scholars often don't feel that they are telling stories. They see themselves as applying philosophical concepts and theories and arguments that engage with historical evidence. So when you say to them, yeah, but you're building a narrative to construct your episode, they feel like, no, I'm not telling a story. I'm just confronting theories with historical evidence. So where's the narrative in that? So I think we should move away, not eliminate the concept, but it shouldn't be put forward in a standardized conceptual framework for reconstructivist IHPS. And a good standardized terminology should clearly distinguish between what is methodological and what is communication, to avoid being misleading and unappealing to the HPSers. This is another pathway for renewed IHPS, move away from narrativist terminology and the conceptual framework we employ to address methodological issues. So I will attempt to propose a conceptual framework to do the work. It is an iterative process, so any suggestions today are welcome, and it will probably change in the next few months. And to propose a conceptual framework, I will build on the work done by Kuukkanen, because he has already suggested terminological alternatives that resonate with far more HPS scholars than narrative terminology. So let's go. I propose to use presentation rather than narrative, and to understand presentation as textual and or discursive products used to convince of some thesis or theses about the past. And for clarification, I'm not citing Kuukkanen here, but I'm using the same kind of terminology and trying to respect the same kind of approach, but the definition are my own. So maybe we can discuss during the Q&A if it's the best way to define terms or not. So textual and discursive products used to convince of some thesis about the past. If I write a book about the history of First World War, I'm dancing a presentation of the First World War. It can also be in oral discourses, as long as the intended purpose of the product is to convince of some thesis. Okay, And the benefit here to use presentation rather than narrative is that stories can be included as kind of presentations. But we can also think of presentations that aren't constructed into a story format. So when I propose a story about the First World War, I'm trying to convince the reader to understand the First World War in a certain way. But I can also try to convincing other pieces without using a story or an explicit story at least. Another part of the conceptual framework is to use colligation rather than case and episode. Problem with case and episode is that it has a kind of realist connotation, like when we listen to an episode of The Simpsons, we aren't actively contributing to the construction of the episode. We're watching an episode that is already constructed. So we can use rather the expression colligation to avoid hindering the constructive or reconstructing aspect of framed historiographical whole. So a colligation is a framed historiographical whole reuniting lower order entities. And what is important here is that these entities can be conceived separately of each other and independently of the colligation. So any presentation of the chemical revolution must rely on a particular assembling of experimentations, debates, intention, discoveries, the Priestley doing this kind of experiment, Lavoisier proposing this kind of theory. All these lower order entities, we can conceive them independently of the idea of a chemical revolution, and we can also conceive them separately of each other. And in this conceptual framework, colligation are used to support theses or theses advanced by presentations. And just a note on that, it's not proper to IHPS. It is an essential feature of the historian's work to try to support thesis by the use of colligations. When it comes to framing a colligation, we need at least 3 historiographical operations. And these historiographical operations are covered in different ways in the work of Kuukkanen and Kinzel. But here I propose another classification. So you have first the operation of selecting. So you have to choose which lower order entities are actual and potential parts of the whole. So when we talk about this civilizing process, we have to make explicit what are the parts of that process and what are not parts of it. After we have to structure, so we have to establish what are the relations between these components, so the lower order entities that we assemble, that we have selected. So selecting, structuring, and finally, the operation of treatment, which is to characterize the whole part relations with a specific conceptual apparatus. So when you select some lower order entities and you structure them some way, after that you have to say, okay, these entities, they form what? A process, and that process is what? Is civilizing process. What do I mean by civilizing process? A change of mentality, and so on. So these are the 3 operations that are hindered when we, not hindered, that are hidden when we present historical episodes. The episode is already framed, but to get to that episode, we have to go through these historiographical operations. And note that in this definition, nothing prevents us from considering that the lower entities within a colligation can also be colligations. For instance, we can conceive that the French Revolution is a lower order entities of a bigger colligation, the Revolution era. Because we can think of the French Revolution independently of that higher order colligation, and we can also think it separately from other components of the Revolution era. Another note, and this is intra-canon, I believe that a descriptive historiographical content can also satisfy the condition of this definition of colligation. So we can say that the execution of Louis XVI is a higher order entity assembling lower order entities such as the arrival of the executioner. So that would be a descriptive colligation. In any case, this is more for technical debates. The main idea that I try to put forward. Finally, last concept of this conceptual framework is colligatory concept, and here I'm not quite satisfied with this definition. It's a first attempt, and if you have any suggestion, they are welcome. We can understand a colligatory concept as a concept requiring a colligation to be operational. An example could be useful here. For instance, we can understand what the Renaissance means. So, if I speak to someone who's not knowing what the Renaissance means, I can say to him, okay, it's a change of mentality occurring in 14th, 16th century Italy, where the modern self appeared. And yeah, the person would get a sense of what is meant. But to fully assess the concept and use it historiographically, we need to grasp what is the colligation at play. So, okay, but where, when, in what are the instantiation of that change of mentality? You need to have a colligation in order to fully grasp what is at play here. So that's what differentiate colligatory concept from other kinds of concepts. For instance, if you have the concept of dog, you don't need a colligation to understand to assess the concept. But if you want to assess the concept of the Renaissance, you need a colligation to fully grasp what is at play. Okay, and last point for the missing connections is this idea that the GPH scholars do not directly engage with HPSers. So even if now I've proposed a conceptual framework to think IHPS in a reconstructivist fashion, it will unlikely be enough to persuade any HPSers to embrace it. It's not enough just to put forward a new conceptual framework. If we wanted to catch on, we must demonstrate potential solutions that this framework can give us to problems identified by the practitioners. That way we can gain more attention. So that's what I will try to do in the last part. This part is more exploratory, so it will be shorter than the others. And I want to have your insights on the kind of application I'm trying to put forward here. So we will cover three different problems that are discussed by the practitioners of HPS. namely debates surrounding concepts such as the scientific revolution or scientific revolutions, the issues of cherry picking, and problems of presentism. So debates about scientific revolutions. So if you're not familiar with HPS, here is a presentation of the problem. So are disagreements about the historical existence of scientific revolutions empirical, or are they primarily conceptual? In other words, why do historians well, the same evidence disagree so much about whether the concept of scientific revolution applies or not to certain sets of events? You have historians in HPS, and it's a very substantive literature addressing the question of, is it empirical, is it conceptual? Why are we so in a disagreement still to this day, after many articles wrote on the subject? So if we turn this problem into the reconstructivist terminology or way of thinking, we could ask the question, is it possible, even though the claims there was a scientific revolution and there was not a scientific revolution, even though they are mutually exclusive, is it possible that we could produce legitimate colligations that support each of them? So we cannot accept both the claims, but maybe we can produce legitimate colligations that support each of them. After all, the chemical revolution is a colligatory concept. It requires a colligation to be irrational, just like the Renaissance, as presented earlier. So maybe even in a world where we would have access to all the evidence we can dream of, and even in a world where we could directly observe the course of things as it unfolds, maybe we could still support both claims by selecting, structuring, and treating some elements in different ways. So if this is true, then we can only assess that under these colligations, there was a scientific revolution, but not under those, or something like that. So this is the exploratory part. And what is funny here is that you have people doing IHPS like Hasok Chang, who's defending a pluralistic view of science, saying that maybe in science we should embrace mutually exclusive theories about the world. But to do so is presenting the episode of the chemical revolution as if there was only one way, a good way to articulate that episode. So maybe we should go pluralist also about the way we present historical episodes. And that's a claim that Kinzel made in her article or chapter. Next problem, the debates about cherry picking. The problem in HPS, and you have publication, very recent publication on that subject studied this day. So the question, how to avoid only selecting the episodes that are convenient for supporting our philosophical claim or claims. That's the issue of cherry picking, choosing what is convenient for your arguments. But if we think the question with the IHPS reconstructivist fashion, you could say that all episodes imply selection from the start, from the outset, because you are choosing lower order entities when you reconstruct something from the past. So in the reconstruction process, you are already selecting lower order entities. So cherry picking in a way is a normal condition of historiography. It is unavoidable. People are choosing what is convenient for their presentation. The question here is rather what makes a selection more convincing than another, or in other words, how the selective dimension of the colligative work of an accordance succeed or not to support the thesis of representation. And again, or something like that. We can improve what I'm suggesting. Okay, last problem and last debate. Debate about presentism. So the problem, we can spell it out a simple way. Should we avoid using content drawn from the present to deal with the past? There's a still to this day work done on that question. So we can interpret the question in another way. If we go and ask if some dimensions of the colligative process are inherently presentist. So the question again is about what makes a colligation effective in supporting the thesis of presentation. So to give some example, when you select some lower order entities, you are doing this operation from a certain perspective in the present. You are using concepts from the present in your process of selecting some lower order entities. You are using knowledge from the present to identify and establish what are these lower order entities. When you structure, you also do some kind of operations. You understand the relations between the entities with the conceptual apparatus that is formed in the present and that is informed by the present. And same thing with the treatment. When you posit relations, whole parts relation. And again, something like that. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for your support. Thank you very much.
Let's go to switch seats. I'll do the online stuff that they can participate. But first, maybe anybody in the room who wants immediately question, comments, concerns, criticisms, or anything like that.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, there's someone.
Yeah, but let's start first in the room. I need to unmute them and so on, you know.
Can we have the slides too? It would be nice to go back to some slides.
Yes, I can always show them, yes, but I just need to stop sharing them for a while now. And then we're speaking. Please, anybody here first? What's the start? Jouni-Matti.
Okay, yes, thanks so much. I mean, this was an excellent presentation and one of the most comprehensive, maybe even the best of different approaches in integrated HPS, these different approaches that you enlisted there. They came across very clearly. Maybe I begin with this kind of, there's a lot of interesting points, and indeed we could maybe discuss some details at some point, some suggestions you made, but maybe I start with this idea of, you brought up quite in the end the idea of pluralism, that Hasok, for example, is pluralist about different approaches in science, unlike decades before, very monistic view about the explanations or methods of science. But why wouldn't he be then equally pluralist about the approaches to the past or the history of science? That's actually the same sentiment that I had in mind in the missing narratives paper. And the criticism against the SSK and the social studies of science, that they thought that sciences can't get absolutely right about the reality, natural sciences, but they didn't apply the same reflective capability to themselves, to their capability to describe the past science. And I think that's a very good case, so I agree. Then where comes the whole discussion about the post-narrativism and the argumentation is then, if we have several accounts of, let's say, so-called chemical revolution or whatever happened around that time, we still, of course, wouldn't want to accept just any construction or reconstruction as equally good. So we need to have the standards, the evaluative standards, and that's the hard part. So if there is no like absolutely right, if you accept that, then how to prioritize, how to rank between different presentations. That was the hard nut, and also the 2015 book, in my case, the biggest challenge. How to reject absolute objectivism, but not slide into relatives. And now I come to my two questions. The first one is when you lay down the quite in the end selection and those other criteria, what takes place. It sounds to me as if it's a theory of historiographic construction, but is it also theory for evaluation? So it sounded like we use selection and colligation and other things. That's what historians de facto do in a way. Does it also work for evaluation or ranking between different better and worse presentations?
So the question is
it also can it be used to evaluate?
But what can be used to evaluate?
The theory, or what is your theory for evaluation?
Okay.
In the end, if you indeed go for slides, I can show. Go quite to the end.
It's a lot of stuff.
Still selected.
Yeah, maybe a little before. There was a whole list of them, I think. Maybe was it the missing connection? Anyway, if you don't find it now, my theory, what you described, what takes place in when historians construct their accounts.
Okay, so selection.
And then
selection.
is it also a theory for evaluation?
Okay, yeah.
And choosing.
Okay.
And my smaller question is, if you propose this theory, who is the receptive audience? Is it HPS or is it also historians of science? It's also philosophers of science. So who would be receptive in your mind?
Okay, good. Yes. For the slides, maybe it can be of use. Just to the last, not the last slide, but just before. To have selecting structure.
Yeah, maybe you meant that.
Okay, so
Share it and for the people.
so in both in Kinzel and your work, we have something like insights about how to evaluate different colligations, but these insights I think could be refined in analyzing each of these operations. So instead of asking the question, what is it for a colligation to be better than another, just asking the question, we could refine by asking what is good cases of selection, what are good cases of selection, what are bad cases of selection. Same thing for what are good cases of structuring, what are bad cases of structuring, and same thing for the treatment. I think I'm not offering theory of evaluation. This is more a descriptive theory of historiographical operations that come into play. But I think we can move from this to develop a fully fledged theory of evaluation. Maybe in a constructivist way, maybe in a more realist way, depending on what we intend to do. But I think clarifying what is a good selection, what is a good structuration, what is a good treatment could lead us to quite interesting breakthrough. So that's for the first question. And for the expected audience, I think that what I'm suggesting today, the conceptual framework, if it works to solve or dissolve some problems that HPSers are concerned, I think that they will be the first audience. If they feel both that the conceptual framework describe in a good way the operations they are doing when they are writing history of science, and also solve some problems that come to their minds when they're thinking about their own practices, then the first audience is this one. But another thing is that, and it was my second suggestion from the first plan I had for this presentation. I had the idea to suggest that maybe IHPS is just history of science in the end, because when you're doing history of science, you are also trying to form a presentation to support some thesis, and you have to do a colligation in order to support your thesis. So it seems to be just a way to do history of science. The only difference between IHPS and the history of science would be that the thesis you are trying to support in HPS are inspired from the theories you have in the philosophy of science. So you have theories about scientific progress, rationality, what is knowledge, what is a fact, or how do we deal with facts, and so on. So the source of the questions would be philosophy of science, but there wouldn't be a big difference between the way of supporting your claims between IHPS and history of science in general. So if this claim is right, the audience can go broader than just HPSers, but also just historians of science, and in some way to historians in general. If we are able to develop a good theory of evaluation based on these three operations, it would apply also for historians.
Okay, good. Yeah,
I think next. Next is, I think, online. Is there nobody so far has put themselves up to speak online? If there's not, we can also again go to the room. But I say one thing online. David Shannon says hello. He could come and could not stay.
Okay.
But he might have to go first. Says hello to you.
Okay.
Sorry, I will definitely watch the talk on YouTube afterwards. Sorry.
He couldn't listen all the way through. Good. Yes. I mean, I would also have, but maybe for today. Well,
you're the boss.
I'm the moderator. Well, I'm officially the moderator, so
yeah. Well, you make the decision.
That is correct. I'll yield to you.
I have a bunch of questions. It's interesting. It's an interesting talk. Thank you for that. Well, I have something related to this, and this is just clarificatory questions. First, about colligatory concepts and colligations. It seems that they are all over the place.
Yeah.
It seems that that's nothing specific to historiography to have colligations. Dinner is a colligatory concept. Forest is a colligatory concept.
Okay.
I mean, we have almost everything other than something that we accept as a primitive seems to be a colligatory concept. So all sorts of everyday objects, everyday phenomena are colligations. So to turn that into question is that would it help to think of the colligations within the context of historiography, just to think of how we make concepts in general? I mean, that could be any realm of the reality. And now related to that, and if you go back to the slide where they had the selecting, structuring, and you gave this. There was also a slide where you had the.
Before or after this?
I don't remember. But just the one that you had open for Jouni-Matti, but then I think one after that also you explained these in later.
No, this
No, you
is the
didn't.
end.
Oh, it's earlier, yeah, it's,
Yes,
it's in
okay,
the
right.
same connection.
We
So,
didn't find them.
So
Already.
how's this about, I mean, how does this differ from definition? Isn't that something that
Okay.
you define? You define a forest. Then you can have contested concepts of forest. Someone has another type of concept of forest. Going back again, what you suggested in the end that, yeah, if this is how you define revolution, then it did happen. If this is how you define revolution, then it didn't happen. Exactly as with the, I don't know, limnologists might disagree about whether something is a lake or whether the lake is polluted or whatnot. I mean, you stipulate, you give a definition, you select the components, you explain how they relate to one another and so forth. Here's my definition of a polluted lake. And then once you've given your definition, then it's up for the others to evaluate and say that they can play with your concept, and then you disagree or agree, or they contest your concept and so forth. So it seems that there's nothing. I mean, well, maybe this is to frame it as a question that is there anything really specific to historiography to think of colligations?
Good. Okay, it's a question I already encountered when I did another presentation at École Normale Supérieure in France. So I think one way to see a difference between, but maybe it's not enough. Maybe it's not convincing enough. Is that when you talk about the concept of dinner, and you want to give a definition of the concept of dinner, you will try to find something like a shared essence between all dinners, or a family resemblance between what we call dinners in our use of the concept. And if you succeed to do so, we will have kind of the full understanding of the concept. So the definition is aiming at something like shared essence or family resemblance between members of the extension of the concept. Same thing applies if you want to find the extension of the concept of dogs or forest. You will have to see each object that satisfy the conditions of your definition. But when you talk about the Renaissance, the extension of the Renaissance as a concept, just as a concept, there's only one object in the extension. It's the historical process or the change of mentality, the Renaissance. But we can argue if it is something real or something constructed, but you have only one member of your extension. But in the colligation, you have a lot of lower order entities, such as the clothes that Laurent de Medici was wearing, the paintings of Vittorio Carpaccio, and these are not instantiation of, they are not tokens of your concept of the Renaissance. They are components. And it is the relation between these components and the relation between these components and the whole that makes it a colligation. So that would be a difference, a way to approach the difference between general concepts such as forests, dinner, and colligatory concepts such as the chemical revolution. And so this also helps making a distinction between a definition and grasping a colligation. I can give you a definition of what the Renaissance is, and the definition will be perfect to identify the extension, the objects in the extension. If I say to you it's a change of mentality that occurred in Italy between this century and that century, with that definition, you are able to find, okay, so that would be the object of the extension of the concept. But you will need something more to assess the concept, to use it to explain, for instance, other historical phenomena. To criticize the concept, you will need to grasp, okay, but what are the elements that are subsumed under this colligatory concept? So that would be a way to apply. If you are able to demonstrate that we also need to do that for general concepts such as dinner or forest, dog, then maybe all is colligatory and we have just a new definition of what concepts are. But I think that at least this point about the extension shows a difference between colligatory concepts and general concepts.
Yeah, I mean, a quick Nachfrage perhaps.
Well, yeah, fine. I get the point of uniqueness, though I don't think that historical things are only things that are unique. I mean, Finland is a colligatory concept. That's unique too. We should be. It shouldn't be that difficult to find things that are unique from other realms of reality than from history.
So yeah, this is the kind of argument that you have into historicist epistemology. People always say that all particular are historical in some sense. That Finland is to understand what you mean by Finland, you have to understand it as a concrete particular. So that I will be more inclined to accept, that you have other particular that aren't properly historiographical, but that are also colligatory concepts. We would need to dig deeper to see if there's a difference between something like Finland and something like the Renaissance, of course. But I think the example
there doesn't need to be a difference. I mean, I don't know.
No, maybe it's just an argument in favor of colligatory concepts, the importance of studying colligatory concepts.
Maybe that. It's just that if they are, if we find them in other places, and I mean that there may be a good deal of work done there, it would be a different thing if it's unique also to historiography, that then the work has to be conducted there. But it surely doesn't seem to me that that's somehow unique to
maybe what is properly historiographical is that historians are debating a lot on colligatory concepts. Are we debating that much about
scientists? Maybe they debate what is a lake.
Yeah,
I mean, well, it's a further question that whether the uniqueness is relevant. I mean, what relevance does it have as it differentiates our other types of definitions of things? But I mean, we can talk about that later.
Well,
that's a good point.
We still don't have any question online as far as I see. Please make yourself known if you're online. Otherwise, you can come to the room again. I would ask question if possible. I'm a bit in a difficulty here because you're using my handbook. That's fine. I usually look before I ask questions, so I'm a bit out of the depth now of what I want to ask. So let me start just from memory first. It also comes back on colligatory concept. David, the camera just went offline. I don't know why. For online. Well, I guess we do it without the camera shot. With my apologies, I'll fix it afterwards. It was last time already the same like this. So I'm still not entirely sure on the level of two things. Jouni-Matti asked one thing: who is your audience? And what change does it, and then what change does your proposal make to the way IHPS is actually being done? Because you have said we don't have enough standardized terminology. Yes, that's because everything is contentious among all people. That's fine, I guess. But then you said, on another level, you said HPS scholars don't like narrative. But that's basically like, it sounds like it's not to their taste or something, but that can't be their criterion why we're not going to use the term narrative anymore.
No.
Yeah, and then there's narrativist, okay, but it seems like that then, I think your argument was something like the philosophy of historiography has been overemphasizing narrative too much, and that is not attractive to HPS scholars because they have other problems than narrative as well. And now you come with another master concept, colligation.
Mm-hmm.
And now you say, well, it was narrative before. If everything was before narrative, now everything is colligation. So maybe that is useful to HPS, because if everything really is colligation, then you'll have to leave colligation anyway, too. So let's grant that the colligation is really there it was not. What does colligation now do for the HPS scholars? How does it change their work? IHPS, so not just HPS.
Mm-hmm.
And the second point was on maybe short selling certain forms of HPS. I mean, I haven't looked at Larry Logan and stuff in a long time, but saying that they sort of were empirically naive, or that they didn't understand that historiographic episodes are also constructed by historians. I think this we can take for granted. The problem is not that they are constructed. The problem is there circularity somehow by using the work of historian in a way that already have defined the scientific revolution, then by ourselves making a philosophical claim about the scientific revolution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have all this, we have all discussion about realism. That's also from Logan, and pessimistic induction, that sort of stuff. They also have to select a certain episodes from historiography by necessity. But the problem is not that historians have already theoretically mediated that material. The problem is there any sort of circularity perhaps between the philosophical claim and the way you select episodes? But that's a general problem. Any kind of philosophical claim about historiography, about the philosophy of science, the philosophy of philosophy will have to face that claim. That problem is not particular to any of the HPSs, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I guess these are the two questions for the moment, without consulting my notebook in detail.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I'll try to fix the camera. My apologies.
Okay. Good. You have two questions, but I have four answers.
Okay.
But it's on different points. Of course, first,
Okay, please continue.
I repeat that the claim is not that we should give up narrative terminology in general philosophy of historiography because it's unappealing for others. No, of course it's not something we should do. If we want to lose the concept of narrative, it would be because it's not useful for GPH. But to the question why colligation is better, because it is also something, a concept that comes from the philosophy of historiography. There's a practical reason why it's better, and it's because it's new and people generally don't have ordinary understanding of the concept. When you talk about narrative, it is a word that exists in the common language. So I think HPSers, they hear narrative, they are already injecting some meaning from the ordinary use. That's why they understand it as stories. So because the colligation is not something that exists outside of technical vocabulary, I think we kind of avoid this kind of confusion or the concept being misleading. But this is just a practical reason. It's not a theoretical or a philosophical reason to use colligation. So that's I think the question. What is essential to the question is why thinking these problems in terms of colligation is better than thinking them in terms of narratives. And
Or to be pluralist about the colligation, narrative, description,
yeah,
statistics, all kinds of stuff that historians also do.
Yeah. I think that it is for the question of reconstruction. If you use both narrative and colligation, you will have overlaps between the two. When you read, for instance, the article of Kinzel, her chapter, she talks about three-dimension theory-ladeness, narrative operations, and selection. And when she's talking about narrative operations, she's talking in a Hayden White way, so using the structure of comedies or the structure of tragedies and so on. But this point is something different in the activity of reconstructing the episode than selection, structuring, and treatment. It is probably a part of the treatment phase to use a structure like structure of comedies to build your narrative. So I think if we use colligation, we can really concentrate on the invisible work of the historian, so selection, structuring, and treatment, and we can apply maybe narrative for the rhetorical, aesthetical, the communicative dimension of the episodes. So I think this distinction is better to differentiate in these two dimensions of the historian's work. And for the question about circularity, so I have a colleague that was visiting in Cambridge last year, and he just finished his PhD, holding claims like we can avoid the circularity problem when you are testing a philosophical claim, and that the theory that is needed to make that philosophical claim is not used to study the episode. But still, in this way of saying things, we consider that the episode is kind of something that is that is available without problem. So he said, yeah, the episode exists because the episode is a good episode because it doesn't use the concepts that are implied in the philosophical claim. But still, we can argue that maybe the episode is problematic because of the historiographic operations or its colligative dimensions. So I don't think it's only a problem of circularity. I think that there are more to this, because even in cases where we avoid the problem of circularity, we can still find this empirically naive assumption that the episode will give you the key to test your philosophical.
What's the name of the scholar?
Dubian Kanesh.
Okay, I've been similarly based on Peter Kosser.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes. Maybe we are back to first and second online. Let me just say one thing. Maybe you should write a riff of a famous paper called The Missing Colligatory Term. Integrated history and philosophy. Just a suggestion. You're riffing on a famous paper that we were discussing today, right? You all have to be seen today. Is there online still question before we come to see the room is very active still? What I see for the moment. There's nothing, so please, Jouni-Matti.
Okay, I have this long rambling comment, but
now to comment online to the camera, you go first.
Okay, first a brief comment about the colligation. I think it's a good question what colligation is, whether it's a unique category itself, and I think there's more work to be done on that, what colligation actually is. What is clear to me anyway is that there are many wrong conceptions of what it is, and people have postulated. For example, it's not the same as theoretical. term or concept, like some have suggested, because it's not observation, because particularity, it's not general. It's not like a natural kind type. It doesn't have essences. What I, at some point, my thought is like when you do when diagrams, so you have parts and particles and you draw a circle, and then that you make something new out of that. So all food that I like, that colligate indeed. But the foods that I like, let's say, don't have anything shared between them except that I like them, come from my subject side. So that seems to be something that historians do. It's the constituents that are somehow created and integrated together. So the constituents are not inherently don't share anything essential. And that seems to me, this is just a comment, in historiography, it seems, at least in gradual terms, historians, if this is fitting, seem to be using it more than others, at least more consciously, and probably has to do with the scope, because they describe large scope of areas which are very difficult to, and one might say impossible, then why don't you go to very, referential empirical statements, but would that be history anymore? Yeah. So that's about them. The question is really, if you use them, if you accept them, how to justify them as you, been saying. But then I come to the evaluation point. And I think one concept that perhaps is missing is rationalize. Because at least that's what I emphasize in every second paper.
Mm.
Evaluation of what? What when you say evaluation?
Evaluation of what is generated, whether they're colligations or accounts of history. How do we evaluate what comes out of the machine? And my like a key concept is rationality there.
Tricky concept in itself.
Huh?
Tricky concept.
Very tricky concept. Very tricky concept.
But we'll get the right definition.
Fortunately, I have attempted to say something than just that. I mean, coming from this, interestingly, you put Kinzel and me together, and we have things in common. But I think Kinzel starts from where he talks about this reconstructive approach. It's more like to do with theory ladens, as you say, more like a language and circularity, the Joseph Spitz problem that all the case studies have to anyway, because we start with concepts we are sort of in a circle. Well, in my case, it's maybe the whole account, like this narrativist dimension. And I don't remember what is Kinzel's solution. It's this iterative model, but does he have this kind of solution for justification? In my case, the solution was to determine these three dimensions for evaluation, this argumentative, rhetorical, and the epistemic values. So I guess the first question would be, would those be applicable for evaluative purposes? But actually, when you showed, then it seems that what this kind of, what is selecting, structuring, and so on, colligation, how do you select? What's the good selection? How the good structure? Maybe it's the epistemic values, the old famous set of epistemic values that you try to create as coherent set or as large set or avoid contradictions, if that makes sense. So is that a possibility? And now the final addition, this another leg, just to remember all what I said, is what could be possible as well is to think about Lakatos. Because Lakatos had an idea of rationality maximization. And I had this one paper where I tried to apply it. And it means basically, in the case of historiography of science, he had this idea that the historians of science have the frameworks, falsificationism and conventionalism and his own project and so on. So if you accept that there is no neutral data and there is no uniquely correct account of all history of science, then the description itself is a framework of theory laden. And how to do then, if we have this in a pluralist situation, we have several accounts within or coming from specific different kinds of frameworks, then how to evaluate them? Because we could throw the same data to historians and they are different philosophically inclined. So they come with the 4 different accounts or 4 different narratives, no difference. If your falsification is your realist story. You know, you pick up a little bit, you emphasize, you identify different elements of this Newton's case, and then you make a big fuss about that. In the other case, other person does something different. So how to evaluate them? And I think the very applied Lagrangian model was that you try to maximize rationality of the case. And that would mean you explain as much historical data as possible within the premises of this framework. And whatever is left unexplained, then that's a failure. So whichever manages to explain as much as possible of historical data within the framework is basically the preferred and the best.
That's rationality.
Yes, that would be that's one applied way to think about rationality. Yeah.
It's an application of rationality, it's not a definition of rationality.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, but that's yeah. Of course, you need to define it a little further what it means to explain most of the historical data. So you need still probably epistemic values. So it tells, for example, as little unexplained phenomena as few anomalies as possible and things like that.
First, maybe a question. Just when you're talking about maximizing rationality, you're talking about historical data. Do you mean the evidence, or you include in historical data?
I don't mean
Evidence.
not evidence, because evidence is already evidence for something. So
Okay.
you have first data, which is basically neutral.
Okay, so
And it only turns evidence when you have a question or something that it answers to.
okay, so not evidence, but traces in that case.
Yeah,
Is so
absolutely
historical data is
anything that's available.
traces. Okay.
So you find something and then you say, okay, there's this. Now this is evidence for X on Y and Z.
Okay. Good. So this. So first on the question of the tripartite theory of justification, I think that's an example. It's in my view, of course. I think that's an example of the confusion I was trying to identify when I was talking about the difference of narrative level, what we understand in common language as narrative level, and colligative level. Because you have, like you said, in post-narrativist philosophy of historiography, there are epistemic aspect of the justification, rhetorical aspect of justification, discursive aspect of justification. But I think that rhetorical and discursive are applied to the presentation, not to the colligation. So the presentation follows the rules of logic or good reasoning, for instance. The presentation is integrating what is discussed in the actual space of reasons of historians, notable work of other historians. Right. So this is part of the presentation. And I think, indeed, that the colligation is almost just epistemic justification. But we would have to dig more in that question. When we look to Avi Tucker's work, he solves the problem of colligation in like one paragraph in Oral Knowledge of the Past. I'm saying that ironically, of course, but he's saying colligation must be evaluated as descriptive hypothesis given their relation to the evidence. But the question is, what makes a colligation more plausible than another given the evidence? And here we don't have the answer. Of course, we can say the hypothesis of the Renaissance is highly plausible given the evidence, but why? And I think we have to look into these aspects of colligation to evaluate that. And even the solution that you're proposing right now, that maximizing rationality to explain more stuff, we still have to understand, okay, but what is a good explanation? And how does a selection explains more stuff than another selection, for instance? Is it just the number of data you cover, or the scope, or the... So we have to consider these kind of questions. But maybe this is the way. In my thesis, I kind of defend something like this idea of maximizing rationality. It's a relation to the evidence. But also there's different types of colligation. So this is another thing I'm putting forward in the thesis. And there are some type of colligations that do not have any relation to the evidence. So in these cases, the question is still open. How do you evaluate them if there's no relation with the evidence?
Can I follow up on this question for both of you on that level? But first, on the last thing you said, colligation is no relation to the evidence. What about it too? What would be an example, like the Dark Ages or something like that? Which is a very strong morally evaluative component and is otherwise a period term.
Now, I would say that, okay, so the Dark Ages, if you consider the dark, because there's like a moral judgment.
Yes, it's very strongly morally laden, and it's probably not coming out of the evidence. I mean, they are torturing people and killing, but so before and after and so forth. So
yes,
you could try to give reasons why it was dark.
Yeah,
people have done that. Is that evidence? It's probably not evidence.
So in my typology, I would say that this is a conceptive colligation. So there are descriptive colligations, conceptive colligations, and constructive colligations. I won't get into the detail of each of them, but so the Dark Ages would be conceptive because you need a descriptive colligation for that colligation to be minimally justified. So we have in Quebec a similar thing, we call it the Grande Noirceur, which is similar to Dark Ages. And to say that it was a dark period, you first need to describe it in a certain way, to reconstruct it in a certain way, saying that there was corruption, there was, I don't know, wars, sickness, and all that. So this is the descriptive colligation that you need first. And after that, you need to apply a judgment that it was a dark period. But this judgment is not related to the evidence. It's related to other things, norms of evaluation. So we can like reject a colligation like the Dark Ages if we show that the descriptive colligation that is necessary for that conceptive colligation doesn't hold with the evidence. This is a way to.
So what doesn't hold? What doesn't contain what?
So the descriptive. You need the descriptive colligation to put forward your conceptive colligation. So you need to reconstruct the episode with corruption, wars, and so on and so on. And if you can show that this colligation is worse than another, then you can reject the judgment that it was a dark age without engaging into the norms of evaluation of moral judgment. But if the descriptive colligation is good, then after that, there's another step in the argument that is, okay, we accept this reconstruction of the episode, but now is it a dark?
It would be possible to make a case study. Nowadays, rarely Dark Ages is used. It's kind of given up. So why? I mean, case study. What changed? What was the sort of theory change in history?
You don't want to use Dark Ages.
And as a matter of fact, I don't think that's what happened. It's just that you were wrong. I mean, the other historians say that's not the
Well,
description of privilege.
that's only one explanation possible. Of course, it could be.
But even I think that's what de facto happened if you look at the history.
Well, we still use the phrase medieval history, right? Medieval ages. So, that seems to be roughly the same period as what we mean by dark ages. So the problem is just with the term dark and the evaluations that are implied in the term dark, right? So it's not that we're not questioning the idea of that period, but we're questioning the moral evaluations imbued in the term dark.
And it is indeed something recent. If you look at historical judgments by Jonathan Gorman, where he kind of do a history of the norms used by historians in their own understanding of their practice. It was something that was expected from historians to do these kind of moral judgments for a long time. But the explanation maybe for that is social. Right now, we want history to be more, to be closer to science maybe, or to kind of scientific norms. And you don't have value judgment or explicit value judgment in natural science, so that maybe that's why. So, but in my terminology, we would say that now we are more reluctant to do conceptive colligations, and we try to do more descriptive colligations, but this is not the answers to how to evaluate conceptive.
I'm going to check now. I forgot to read out the comment before. We had one comment online, and now we have one hand. So suggest I read out the comment, we get the question still, then you answer, and then we might finish it in the end of 2 hours. I mean, we can continue still, but okay. So I first read the comment, then David asks the question. Okay, then you got the last word, unless we want to continue still. Okay, so the question is from I think what is correct, Emanuela Agosto. Yes, Agostini. Sorry, Emanuela Agostini. And they ask, I just have a particular curiosity, since I'm interested in colligative terms in historiography. For you, Louis-Étienne, is scientific revolution a colligative term like Renaissance? Well, because one would say it is a general term and the second a particular one. So scientific revolution is a general term, Renaissance particular. For me, the second is a colligative term refers to the second order classification, so to speak. And that's also take David's question immediately, please, David.
Okay, hi. Sorry that I have been too late. I haven't heard the talk, so I will have to watch it again. But I enjoyed this discussion, and what occurred to me is actually that you basically said that in order to show that descriptive colligatory term is wrong, to argue against it, you need to show that it fails to account for the evidence, if I understood it correctly, and or some colligatory terms, evaluative one, can be proved wrong, that they are, let's say, unethical, or they fail some moral standards, let's say, or but I think maybe I put it wrong, or I think it still needs some work. But what occurred to me is basically that I would say that historians are more prone to actually get rid of colligatory terms which are proved to be wrong on evaluative. Like we get rid of many colligatory terms that we say that they are somehow wrong, some are showing some period of time in the wrong right, either that they, for example, glorify something or they actually downplay. So historians are very quick to get rid of such colligatory terms, but I think that they are more accustomed to keep colligatory term that could be proved problematic descriptive, like even Middle Ages, because Middle Ages, if you go deep really into the study of Middle Ages, you can see that this colligatory term and the things we commonly associate with Middle Ages is not actually descriptive, or it's often contradicted by evidence. So is this something that you would agree, or what do you think about this? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so I will respond to that first because it's just more recent, and after I will answer to Emanuela's question. The the Middle Age is part of the treatment of the colligation. So you choose to specify the relation between the whole and the parts as a Middle Age, so something that is evaluated. In this case, of course, there's something like an implicit evaluative colligation or conceptive colligation. But if you can also find historians who are using Middle Age without positing this relation between the parts and the whole. So here it's just the term or the expression is connoted in a negative way, but the colligation in itself can be just descriptive. So there's something about the relation that is posited by the historian between the parts and the whole. It is important. It's not just about how you label the colligation or how you name the colligation. But of course, we have conceptive colligation all around in historiography. What is different now is not that historians do not do conceptive colligation, is that in the norms they are putting forward, they are saying that it's not a good thing to do conceptive colligation. But I'm pretty sure that if we study some real work of historian with the conceptual framework I'm proposing, I'm pretty sure we will find conceptive colligations, even when historians do not believe they are doing this kind of work. So that would be my answer to that. For the question, the difference between scientific revolution and the Renaissance, Emanuela, you're right. Of course, scientific revolution, if you understand it as a general concept like forest or dog, is just a concept. But all the members of this concept are colligatory concepts: the chemical revolution, the Copernican revolution, the Einsteinian revolution. These are all colligatory concepts if we follow my definitions, because they all need a colligation to be operational. So maybe in the way I presented the debate, it was about should we agree or not on the existence of scientific revolutions, but to argue on the existence of scientific revolutions, you need concrete instantiation, and these concrete instantiation are colligatory concepts or are colligative in their nature. So that would be a clarification.
Okay. Do you?
Well, I mean, the forest and this black forest, that's the Sherwood forest, and so I mean they are instantiations as well. The reason we call them forests is that because we have some kind of a notion of forest. The reason we call the chemical revolution why it's a scientific revolution and some other is because we have a notion of scientific revolution. So I mean, I have doubts that you can isolate the colligatory concept from other types of concepts in this way.
What the type token difference are here?
Yeah, I think
types don't need to share any property with the tokens, and the type is just the type revolutions, type scientific revolution, and yeah, token.
Right, but how would that differ from forests?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Then
so forest is a type. So forest is a type.
And a scientific revolution is a type.
Yeah, and in forest you have particular concrete, such as that forest or that forest.
And then you have chemical revolution.
So and it's like we've discussed earlier. I'm more inclined to think of Finland as a colligatory concept, but not countries or a country as a colligatory concept. So if it's the same, if it's the same, then it just mirrors that particular concrete are maybe always referred to by colligatory concept. And if this is the case, then we should study colligatory concepts in other disciplines. So the question would be something like, are historical reconstructions aiming at a different kind of colligation than other disciplines? And that would be what.
What hinges on your proposal? Is it that if it's not unique, then what? It's just
Well, just
concepts of
what Louis said, that then there's really no ground for constraining studying colligations within the framework of historiography. If it's a
could be a
general
part
kind,
to-
Yeah,
So rather that, then with allows.
It was a very nice ending word of him to the question of whether what is.
But I mean, this is directly related, because then another aspect that one wants to take into account is what Jouni-Matti was suggesting, that and I find that quite persuasive, that one needs to have a story of why definition, defining things, is what's the difference between defining and colligating. And Jouni-Matti's suggestion was, I mean, that's what you meant by evaluation, right? And that's you need to have reasons of why these things go into that. And then one might think that, well, what about defining? You go on and defining forest and so forth. I mean, is that somehow a similar type of task? I mean, you give reasons why it is these constituents that go there. And one might try go on and find some difference there, that it's really not, it's less up for grabs for you than in the case of maybe some historical evidence. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, Jouni-Matti's example was that, your favorite foods. I mean, that's just, you have a reason. I said, why this group of foods? And then you give me a reason, because those are the foods that they bound together by my attraction towards this person. And that's the only thing. Well, you can't define something like forest like that. I don't like the rocks, so my definition of forest is such a place that doesn't have rocks. So wherever you have the trees and so forth and rocks, that's not forest. So that's that won't do. We think that there's something fishy about that. So something like that. So it's somewhere there in that ballpark. I mean, that's
I don't know how this comes, but then in history writing, normally no one tries to come up with a general theory about anything or general definition about anything. So they don't normally try to produce the definition or theory of revolution. They apply this revolution, of course, is a general concept. But then the real point is to describe the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, the scientific revolution that no one thinks there ever was. Although for a long time people thought there was, because it's now revolutions and different time jumps and so on. So I think the intellectual approach is rather different. So it is even a possibility that you take a very metaphorical understanding of revolution, something is turned upside down, and then you describe the whole host of cases as revolutions of something. And in the end, they might be very, very, very different, except there's a sentiment of something changing drastically. That's what they do. I mean, it seems to be that's the idea of particularity. Of course,
For French Revolution and the scientific revolution, something being turned upside down.
yeah.
In both cases, even though there were no shots were fired.
Yeah.
In any accounts of the scientific revolution.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
Other shots.
No for violence.
There were other shots.
And there was no government.
Intellectual shots.
Well, that's metaphorical.
Yeah,
But in that case, you could use something like family resemblance to explain.
Family resemblance is that's going to be hopeless.
But I think the question is good, and maybe just last remark.
I try to give the last word again. Nobody from this side obstruct.
We can keep talking
No,
after that,
it's
of
fine.
course. But,
We are probably 2 hours.
I think the question is good as, for instance, Uni is using in post-narrativist philosophy of historiography the example of Barack Obama to try to make a difference between things like the Renaissance and Barack Obama. But we could ask the question for the concept of Barack Obama to be fully operational, do we need something like a colligation of lower order entities like the body parts of Barack Obama, the mind of Barack Obama, and if this is the case, then maybe all particular are colligatories.
There will be a follow-up.
Yeah.
I'm happy to end this session on the question, is Barack Obama a colligation? I think we can end it on here. Thank you, everybody online who will discuss.
Well, at least in
further.
terms of this compost of atoms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's